Well, Shabbat Shalom. This is Barbara serving as your host today, and I want to welcome everyone here. And Brother Pete is here as your co-host.
I'm just excited to be here and to be a part of this and to have you join us for it.
Okay, well, today's title is The Jews and the Sabbath, the Forgotten Fraud. Have the Jews ever lost the Sabbath? Well, many people assume Saturday is the biblical Sabbath because the Jews worship on that day. It is claimed the Jews have never lost the Sabbath, and this supposition is accepted as conclusive proof. They think Saturday must therefore be the true Sabbath of the Bible. Truthfully, Jewish scholars deliberately changed the only calendar whereby Yah's Sabbath could alone be calculated accurately. The truth is, regardless of what the average Jew believes or practices, Saturday is not the Sabbath of the Bible. Jewish scholars have never lost the Sabbath, but they did deliberately and knowingly change the calendar by which the Sabbath was calculated. And it happened so long ago, it is possible that many Jews themselves are unaware of everything that was affected by this change of calendars. The Council of Nicaea, also known as the First Ecumenical Council, was convened by the Roman Emperor Constantine in 325 AD, and the council met from May until the end of July that year. And the Council of Nicaea that was held that summer is significant in the history of Christianity, as at that time heathenism invaded the church. The pure apostolic faith of the early Christians became diluted.
At the Council of Nicaea, the last thread was snapped which connected Christianity with its parent stock. The festival of Easter, Astar, had up until now been celebrated for the most part at the same time as the Jewish Passover, and indeed upon the days calculated and fixed by the Sanhedrin in Judea for its celebration. But in future, its observation was to be rendered altogether independent of the Jewish calendar. Constantine the Great, the emperor who assembled the council to further his personal political agenda, decreed the course the Christians were to take. He wanted them to fully separate themselves from their spiritual heritage grounded in Judaism. He declared that no future religious observances were to be calculated by the Jewish calendar, explaining, quote, "For it is unbecoming beyond measure that on this holiest of festivals, Easter, we should follow the customs of the Jews. Henceforth, let us have nothing in common with this odious people. Our Savior has shown us another path. It would indeed be absurd if the Jews were able to boast that we are not in a position to celebrate the Passover without the aid of their rules or calendations." Again, from Graetz.
This declaration had far-reaching, catastrophic effects on the ancient method of timekeeping. Constantius, Constantine's son, went still further. Constantine had outlawed the use of the Jewish calendar for Christian observances, while Constantius forbade the use of it by the Jews. So under the reign of Constantius, 337 to 362, the persecutions of the Jews reached such a height that the computation of the calendar was forbidden under pain of severe punishment. And that's from the Jewish Encyclopedia. I'll leave all these links below for you to look up for yourself. And the significance of this act cannot be overlooked. Under intense persecution, the Jews themselves modified their calculation of time. And the Patriarch Hillel II, the last president of the Sanhedrin, was himself responsible for a change that ultimately led to the acceptance of Saturday as the Sabbath.
The miserable condition of Judea was the occasion of an act of self-renunciation on the part of the patriarch Hillel, which has not yet been thoroughly appreciated. The custom had prevailed that up until now of keeping secret the computation of the new moon and the leap year, and of making known the times of the festivals to the communities in the neighboring lands by announcing them by messengers. During the persecutions under Constantius, this method had proved itself to be impractical and useless. Whenever the Sanhedrin was prevented from fixing the date of the leap year, the Jewish communities in distant countries were left in utter doubt concerning the most important religious decisions. In order to put a stop to all difficulty and uncertainty, Hillel II introduced a final and fixed calendar. With his own hand, the patriarch destroyed the last bond which united the communities dispersed throughout the Roman and Persian empires with the patriarchy.
So the fact that this change occurred over 1,600 years ago explains why people assume that Saturday is the true Sabbath, simply because the Jews worship on it. And Jewish scholars, however, remain well aware that this was a complete change of calendar. In declaring the new month by observation of the moon and the new year by the arrival of spring can only be done by the Sanhedrin. In the time of Hillel II, the Romans prohibited this practice. Hillel II was therefore forced to institute his fixed calendar, thus in effect giving the Sanhedrin's advice approval to the calendars of all future years. And we did a video about this, why was the Hebrew calendar fixed by Hillel II. So I hope you'll go watch it all. So it cannot be emphasized enough that Jewish scholars are fully aware that the calendar they now use is different than the one established by Yah and confirmed by Moses at the Exodus. The historical documentation in this article is taken entirely from the writings or statements of the Jews themselves. They established that not only is Saturday not the Sabbath of the Bible, but they know it is not. Can man change time?
Jewish scholars know that it was specifically a calendar change that changed the Sabbath. Rabbi Louis Finkelstein was well-known, well-respected Jewish scholar. The Jewish communities of the world selected Finkelstein as one of the top 120 Jews who best represented, quote, a lamp of Judaism to the world. In a letter dated February 20th, 1939, Finkelstein readily admitted, quote, the Jewish calendar was fixed in the 4th century, end quote. Heinrich Graetz, in his voluminous 6-volume work published by the Jewish Society of America, acknowledged, quote, even the computation of the calendar and trade in articles of religious use were forbidden, end quote, in the 4th century. That's Graetz, Volume 2.
Many people assume that because the Roman Gregorian calendar today has a continuous weekly cycle of 7 days each, the week in use today was somehow fitted to the Hebrew week of 7 days. Therefore, they conclude Saturday is the 7th-day Sabbath of Scripture. Such assumptions, however, do not understand the basic difference between a solar calendar format and how the biblical lunisolar calendar worked. The ancient Sabbath calendar. Jewish scholars know that the Sabbath was observed by the faithful from the days of the 4th century clear back to creation, was not part of a continuous weekly cycle. Rather, months followed the phases of the moon. The weekly cycle itself restarted with each new moon. Therefore, the seventh-day Sabbath was not part of a continuous weekly cycle as it is in the modern Saturn day week. Here's a quote from the Encyclopedia from the Jews.
The new moon is still, and the Sabbath originally was, dependent upon the lunar cycle. Originally, the new moon was celebrated in the same way as the Sabbath. Gradually, it became less important, while the Sabbath became more and more a day of religion and humanity, of religious meditation and instruction, of peace and delight in the soul. That from Universal Jewish Encyclopedia on holidays.
Jews today still calculate their annual religious festivals off a lunar solar method of time measurement. It is for this reason that the Passover, the Pesach, and Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, drift from date to date on the continuous weekly cycle of the Gregorian calendar. Their weekly Sabbaths, however, no longer have any connection to the phases of the moon. It is here that most people trying to prove Saturday is the biblical Sabbath make a mistake. They assume that because the Jews worship on Saturday, the biblical weekly cycle was always continuous, with only the annual festivals having a lunar connection. This is not an assumption shared by Jewish scholars. They are fully aware that the ancient Sabbath could not be part of a continuous weekly cycle because it was linked to the phases of the moon. This startling fact is acknowledged by this quote from the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia. With the development of the importance of the Sabbath as a day of consecration and the emphasis laid upon the significant number 7, the week became more and more divorced from its lunar connection, and that's from the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia. It is probable that the change from a Sabbath closely connected to the phases of the moon to a continuously cycling Saturday Sabbath occurred at the time of Hillel II fixed the calendar. He did more than just reveal their rules of calendation. It appears he also was responsible for introducing a Saturday Sabbath, because when he fixed the calendar, he also had to introduce rules of postponement. At that time, rules of postponement were introduced. Up until Hillel II, rules of postponement were unnecessary because annual festivals and the weekly Sabbaths were all observed on the same lunisolar calendar. However, when the annual festivals were calculated by a lunisolar calendar, while the seventh-day Sabbath was calculated by a different solar calendar, there were occasional conflicts. Thus, the need arose for the new rules of postponement. So you will see that trumpets had to be postponed. Rule number 1, the Day of Trumpets may not fall on a Sunday, Friday, or Wednesday. Rule 2, the new moon with the moled, if it was at noon or later, Tishri 1, which would be trumpets, would be delayed by 1 day. Rule 3, if the new moon in an ordinary year falls on the 3rd day, which would be Tuesday, then it would be put off for 2 more days. Rule 4, when in a common year succeeding a leap year, the new moon of Tishri occurs on Monday morning, it's postponed then to the next day. So we explained all of this in this video, so I hope you'll watch it for more information. Jewish rules of postponement. Has the true Sabbath been lost?
The argument that believers should worship on because the Jews do, is based on an erroneous assumption that the Jews would never worship on anything but the true Sabbath. Statements from the Jews themselves prove this assumption wrong. The Jews did indeed change the Sabbath when they changed the calendar by which the Sabbath was calculated.
The Sabbath is not a man-made institution. It was divinely established by the Creator. As such, no earthly authority, be it Rome or Jew, has the right to establish a different day of worship or a different method of calculating when it occurs. The Sabbath is to be a perpetual sign between the Creator and His loyal creatures. Because He says in Exodus 31, "Verily my Sabbath you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am Yah that does sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy unto you." And Genesis 1:14 says, "And Elohim said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and years." So the original calendar was established at creation. All who desire to honor their Maker by obeying Him and worshiping on His Sabbath will not look to the traditions of the Jews or the calendar of Rome. Rather, they will worship Him on the holy Sabbath as calculated by the original lunar solar calendar that was established at creation. So to access more information about the Sabbath and how it was changed by the Jews to go along with Constantine and all the rules of persecution, and to learn more about Hillel II and also rules of postponement, please go to our website, lunarsabbathday.com. And thank you for being here today.